Europe's energy battle is about to explode in court, and Hungary is staring down Brussels. Defiant and unyielding, Hungary has launched a legal assault on the European Union, aiming to block the planned ban on Russian energy supplies. The move threatens to ignite a showdown at the heart of Europe, where politics, power, and fuel collide. The lawsuit filed at the EU's top court was confirmed by Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjarto. The legal move targets the EU Council's REPowerEU regulation, which aims to phase out all Russian gas imports by 2028. Under the plan, short-term contracts must end within 6 months, with all remaining pipeline and LNG supplies cut off by the end of 2027. Today, we took legal action before the European Court of Justice to challenge the REPowerEU regulation banning the import of Russian energy and request its annulment. Our case is based on 3 key arguments. First, energy imports can only be banned through sanctions, which require unanimity. This regulation was adopted under the guise of a trade policy measure. Second, the EU treaties clearly state that each member state decides its choice of energy sources and suppliers. Third, the principle of energy solidarity requires the security of energy supply for all member states. This decision clearly violates that principle, certainly in the case of Hungary. Only more expensive and less reliable alternatives are available. Without Russian oil and gas, our energy security cannot be guaranteed, nor can low energy costs be maintained for Hungarian families.
Several EU member states warned the move would drive up energy prices and threaten supply stability. Hungary and Slovakia have openly refused to support the measure.
Announcing the lawsuit on social media, Szijjarto said Hungary is challenging what he called an unlawful ban imposed without unanimous approval. He argued that EU treaties allow restrictions on energy imports only through sanctions, which require consensus among all member states. Szijjarto said Brussels ignored objections from Budapest and Bratislava, pushing the ban through under the guise of trade policy. He stressed that EU law gives each member state the right to decide its own energy mix and suppliers. Hungary also accused the EU of violating the principle of energy solidarity, warning the decision would hit Hungary especially hard. Szijjarto said replacing Russian oil and gas would mean higher prices and less reliable alternatives, threatening energy security for Hungarian households. He warned that without Russian supplies, Hungary cannot guarantee affordable energy. The foreign minister said the legal battle could take nearly 2 years and would depend on political continuity at home. He also accused international energy interests of pressuring Hungary to abandon cheaper Russian energy in favor of costlier US supplies. The EU has grown increasingly dependent on American liquefied natural gas since cutting Russian imports after the Ukraine war began. Energy prices across Europe have surged since 2022, a trend Moscow says proves Western sanctions are hurting European economies more than Russia.
Meanwhile, Hungary's Minister for European Union Affairs, János Bóka, has issued a grave warning that Ukraine's accession to the European Union could push the entire bloc into armed conflict.
Then I pointed out that in the European Union's founding treaty, there is a clause. This is the military assistance clause. This is Article 42 of the European Union Treaty. And there is a provision in this that should a member state of the European Union suffer a military attack, then all other member states of the European Union must provide every available form of assistance and support. And I argued at the time that through a creative interpretation of this particular clause, it would be very easy to drag the entire European Union and its member states into an armed conflict if Ukraine were to become a member of the European Union. And after all this, if one just takes a look at Europe, quite apart from everything else, it's very hard to say that the European political elite isn't truly preparing for war, whose potential start date has already been set for 2030, because by then the European Union must be ready for an armed conflict. Then I pointed out that in the European Union's founding treaty, there is a clause. This is the military assistance clause. This is Article 42 of the European Union Treaty. And there is a provision in this that should a member state of the European Union suffer a military attack, then all other member states of the European Union must provide every available form of assistance and support. And I argued at the time that through a creative interpretation of this particular clause, it would be very easy to drag the entire European Union and its member states into an armed conflict if Ukraine were to become a member of the European Union. And we didn't have to wait long. It seems others are also reading this treaty, and this creative interpretation, this is slowly becoming a mainstream interpretation. It's now clearly evident that this article will be used to transform the European Union into a military alliance and to ensure Ukraine all the military support that must be provided to a member state currently in direct armed conflict with a nuclear power. So I just want to draw attention to the fact that we should take seriously the dangers that come with Ukraine's EU membership, because we take seriously all those who want to push the European Union into this armed conflict, and we must resist this with all our might. Of course, the question is where are we heading? Because if I'm on a bicycle and this bicycle is speeding towards a cliff, then I trust that someone will put a stick in the spokes. Of course, it's also worth looking at this question from the perspective of whether the European Union has provided good or bad answers to major strategic challenges in recent decades. And I'm looking at it all the way from the COVID crisis through the economic crisis, the Russian-Ukrainian war, to climate change. It's very difficult to name a strategic challenge, nor even the trade war with the US and China. It's hard to find a strategically significant issue in recent decades where I could say, yes, the European Union grasped the problem and made appropriate decisions. And if such poor strategic decisions are made repeatedly, then the question arises whether it might actually be good to have someone who occasionally wants to slow down this bike as if in water. It's fine if we go slowly because no one knows if we're heading the right way. And just imagine this. Imagine a little green alien landing with a spaceship in Europe. And then he turns on the TV, the radio, the laptop, and then looks around. And then what does he see? He sees political statements that Ukraine must be supported for as long as necessary, and so intensely, at any cost for as long as necessary. We see that the member states of the European Union are significantly increasing their defense spending. We also see that in several EU member states, military conscription is being reinstated in various forms, first voluntarily, then, if necessary, not voluntarily. The call-up papers are going out one after another. We are seeing that in some Scandinavian countries, the army's right to requisition is being introduced and citizens are being informed about this. And we are also seeing that the French Chief of Staff says Europeans must get used to losing their sons in war and so on. And after all this, if one just takes a look at Europe, quite apart from everything else, it's very hard to say that the European political elite isn't truly preparing for war, whose potential start date has already been set for 2030, because by then the European Union must be ready for an armed conflict. That's the situation.
But the TISA question will come up offhand. Who would want to fight here?
Well, honestly, who wanted the First World War? Did anyone truly want it? I ask people, did they want the First World War? Despite this, they thought our political leaders would be so clever, so cunning, that we'd avoid this armed conflict, because in truth, nobody wants to die in a rat-infested trench. And yet somehow a First World War did happen, and then a few decades later, a second one followed. So to claim that no one desires war and thus there will be no war, I readily concede that the vast majority of European people genuinely do not wish for war. But it seems that the political elite is preparing the decision that this war is simply unavoidable. Moreover, they will even say that this war is morally righteous. Just like before the First World War, we heard voices saying that this is a good war. This will be the last war that will end all wars, because this is a morally just war. But in a war, it's not good and evil facing each other. War doesn't decide who is the good person and who is the bad person. War doesn't decide who is right and who is wrong. War decides only one thing: who lives and who dies. And I believe that people should live, they should choose life, not war.
Russian energy import ban. Yesterday it was officially announced that from the 27th at the latest, importing natural gas from Russia into EU member states will be forbidden. As you've already indicated, as soon as the decision becomes official, Hungary will challenge it at the European Court of Justice. This officially happened yesterday. Not even the announcement at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yesterday it happened. There's an electronic system through which the statement of claim can be submitted. This is the aptly named e-Curia system, and the claim was indeed filed yesterday. Indeed.
What are the chances here?
For one thing, this is going to be a long process. A case before the European Union's court can easily take 1.5 to 2 years. Obviously, this commission, it also depends on the overall efficiency and the speed with which the court is able to move forward with this case. But then again, the arguments we have are actually quite powerful and very strong indeed for our side. As you know, the statement of claim itself contains several major points and a wide variety of smaller legal grounds for us to rely on in court. We are requesting the annulment of this REPowerEU regulation from the court. One reason is that it does not respect the member states' right to energy sovereignty, which means that member states themselves have chosen from where and with what energy carriers they ensure their country's energy supply. Secondly, there's a labeling fraud involved. We lawyers call this a labeling fraud. They claim they're making a trade policy decision, but in reality it's a sanctions decision. Sanctions require unanimity, while trade policy only needs a qualified majority. And obviously they chose a trade policy legal basis because they know full well that otherwise there wouldn't be unanimity for the sanctions decision. And there are many other things besides. Perhaps this also demonstrates that, first and foremost, we must remain out of war. And the other thing is that, quite apart from any war, the first victim of any conflict is always the truth. And from that moment on, all communication related to the war or anything happening in a warring country concerning the war will inevitably be shrouded in the obscurity and fog of war. The issue of forced conscription in Ukraine has been put on our agenda many times, especially because there are also Hungarian victims of this forced conscription. Incidentally, there are European institutions such as the Council of Europe, which in its report, in several places within its report, has stated that these do not comply with the generally accepted standards in Europe. However, we do not see these issues reflected in the Commission documents nor in the discussions held during the Ukrainian accession process. The European institutions ignored this, but we cannot afford to remain silent on this matter, so we must confront the Ukrainian authorities with these events, and we must do everything to guarantee the lives and safety of Hungarian people.